Impression you didn't get on very well with your father.
Yeah, that was right. Because he was not proud of me. He never said, I love you. He never said, I'm proud of you.
What really happened to Andre Rieu? What happens when the king of the waltz faces his greatest silence? Andre Rieu, adored by millions, seemed untouchable. But behind the dazzling lights and golden bows lies a story of struggle, loss, and survival, one that nearly ended in silence forever. Andre Rieu was born in 1949 in Maastricht, a city nestled along the banks of the River Meuse in the Netherlands. His upbringing was shaped by discipline, rigor, and emotional coldness. His father, Andre Rieu Sr., was a conductor, respected but distant. For young Andre, love was measured not in hugs or warmth, but in metronomes and flawless timing. The family household resembled more of a rehearsal hall than a home. His mother, equally stern, had her own fixation: academic success. She drilled her children with the belief that excellence was the only path to worthiness. Creativity had no place at the dining table. Joy was something to be controlled, not expressed. Andre once confessed bluntly in an interview, "My parents didn't love me." It wasn't bitterness, but clarity. That absence of affection etched itself deeply into his personality. Yet destiny had already chosen his escape. At the age of 5, Andre held a violin for the very first time. It wasn't just wood and strings, it was freedom. The moment he drew his bow across those strings, the coldness of his house faded. In the vibrations of music, he felt warmth. The violin became his safe place, his only friend in a house of silence. By his teenage years, Andre's world was divided. On one side, his father's stern classical repertoire, Bach, Beethoven, Brahms. On the other, Andre's fascination with the waltz. To his father, the waltz was frivolous, even vulgar. To Andre, it was magic. He would listen to Strauss and feel the music swirl like laughter at a carnival. While his father conducted with precision and severity, Andre dreamed of conducting with smiles and dancing. This clash defined his youth. Every rehearsal under his father felt like a cage, while every waltz he discovered was a key to freedom. He began to see music not as a rigid performance, but as a bridge between hearts. The contrast couldn't be sharper: the cold echo of his father's baton versus the warm embrace of a Strauss melody. And so, young Andre carried a secret that while his father sought perfection, he sought connection. In 1968, a rebellion quietly bloomed. Andre met Marjorie, a shy but brilliant woman who would become his anchor, confidant, and lifelong partner. Unlike his family, she didn't demand perfection. She encouraged his wild dream that music could be joyful again. Choosing Marjorie meant defying his parents' expectations, but for Andre, love was worth the rebellion. The early years were brutal. In Maastricht, Andre formed the Maastricht Salon Orchestra, just 12 musicians trying to survive in a world dominated by rigid symphonies. Money was scarce, critics were unkind, and the dream seemed impossible. But Marjorie stood beside him, handling the household, translating contracts, and raising their children while Andre chased his vision. Then came the pivotal year, 1987. Andre founded the Johann Strauss Orchestra, once again with just 12 players, but this time with a mission: to revive the waltz as a living art form. His dream was radical: turn classical concerts into parties of joy, where audiences didn't sit stiffly but clapped, sang, and danced. Critics ridiculed him mercilessly. They called his work musical pornography, accusing him of cheapening art. But while critics sneered, audiences laughed and danced. Andre discovered something powerful: he wasn't playing for the elite, he was playing for everyone who longed for happiness. The defining moment came in 1995. His orchestra was invited to perform during the Champions League in Vienna. The world watched, and the second waltz, a Shostakovich piece Andre had recorded, exploded in popularity. Suddenly, it was everywhere, in radios, cafes, and even wedding halls. The album shot to #1 for 19 weeks in the Netherlands, selling over 2 million copies. From there, the Waltz King was unstoppable. Tours spread across Europe. Then came Australia, the UK, Germany, and the United States. Stadiums filled not with pop stars, but with Andre and his orchestra. The numbers were staggering. By the early 2000s, Andre Rieu had become one of the highest-grossing touring artists in the world, at times out-earning Beyoncé and Madonna in ticket sales. Yet his concerts weren't rock spectacles, they were evenings of violins, gowns, and laughter. The rebellion had succeeded. The waltz was back. But every waltz has pauses, and in 2010, Andre's music nearly fell silent forever. While preparing for yet another tour, he developed a vestibular nerve infection, which left him with chronic vertigo. For a violinist and conductor, it was devastating. Standing became impossible, let alone performing. For the first time in decades, Andre was forced to cancel concerts. The losses were staggering: 35 concerts cancelled, over €5 million refunded, and an entire team of 125 musicians, technicians, and staff suddenly without work. The emotional toll was even worse. Andre described it: "I had never felt so unanchored. The man who brought balance and joy to millions couldn't find his own footing." The turning point came not from doctors, but from a fan's letter. She described exercises that had helped her overcome a similar illness. Desperate, Andre tried them. Slowly, almost miraculously, he began to recover. But the incident left scars. Management quietly admitted the risk was permanent. The show could collapse again at any time. Then in 2016, tragedy struck. Ruud Merckx, the beloved trombonist of the orchestra, died suddenly. For Andre, it was unbearable. This wasn't just a musician. This was family. Concerts were cancelled, grief swept the group, and Andre felt the crushing weight of responsibility. The cracks of fame deepened. Constant touring meant endless flights, jet lag, and exhaustion. The world saw glittering gowns and golden violins, but behind the curtain were 4 drips, medical checks, and weary smiles. Andre's body, like his orchestra, was stretched to its limits. The irony was sharp: the man who gave joy to millions was privately battling despair and fragility. Amid the storms of illness, exhaustion, and loss, a quiet but steady protector emerged: Andre Rieu's son, Pierre Rieu. For many years, Pierre had remained in the background, the invisible force who managed logistics, arranged travel, and solved problems before they reached his father. But after Andre's health crisis in 2010, Pierre's role transformed. He was no longer just an organizer, he became a shield, standing between the fragile health of his father and the relentless demands of a global audience. It began with small, practical changes. Pierre noticed that Andre was pushing himself to the brink, with back-to-back concerts and punishing travel schedules that left little time for recovery. Determined to protect him, Pierre quietly redesigned the tours. He built in mandatory recovery days, ensured proper medical staff traveled with the orchestra, and created schedules that gave his father room to breathe. What might have seemed like simple adjustments were, in truth, acts of survival. The orchestra, too, adapted under Pierre's guidance. Concert setlists were subtly restructured. Instead of endless sequences that drained Andre's energy, more storytelling moments were added. Andre would engage the audience with warmth, humor, and anecdotes. These pauses weren't just for entertainment, they allowed his body to recover in real time. What fans experienced as intimacy was, in fact, part of a carefully crafted strategy to keep the maestro on stage without breaking him. And the effect was magical. Audiences felt that Andre was closer to them than ever before. The concerts became less like formal performances and more like evenings spent with an old friend who happened to have a violin. Fans left the arenas feeling not only entertained but deeply connected. They never realized that what they were witnessing was a survival plan, they only saw the music, the laughter, and the joy. The changes also deepened the bond between father and son. For most of his career, Andre had carried the burden of responsibility alone. The orchestra was his creation, his dream, his cross to bear. Now, Pierre was stepping into that space, not to replace him, but to share the weight. In a rare moment of public affection, Andre once called Pierre on stage during a concert in Maastricht. The moment was spontaneous, heartfelt, and unforgettable. Father and son stood together under the stage lights, embraced by thunderous applause. The clip went viral, not because of the music, but because it revealed the humanity behind the spectacle. Fans weren't just cheering for Andre Rieu, the king of the waltz, they were cheering for the Rieu family. Under Pierre's care, the Johann Strauss Orchestra didn't just survive, it flourished. What began as a small ensemble of 12 musicians had become a multi-million euro enterprise, touring the globe with military precision. Pierre approached management with a modern eye, blending respect for tradition with the pragmatism of business. The orchestra was no longer just an artistic endeavor, it was also a global brand, one of the most successful in classical music history. At the heart of this success was the annual Maastricht concert series. Every summer, the Brixpop Square in Andre's hometown transformed into an open-air wonderland. Fans from more than 100 countries flocked to the Netherlands, often planning their holidays around the event. Over 100,000 visitors attended each year, filling hotels, restaurants, and shops. Local businesses referred to the phenomenon as the Rieu effect. Economists noted that Andre Rieu had become as important to Maastricht's tourism economy as tulips are to Holland's image abroad. For Andre, this rebirth was more than financial success. It was spiritual renewal. The maestro who had once stood alone on stage, shouldering the weight of an orchestra and the judgment of critics, now knew he was not alone. His son was beside him, not with a violin, but with something just as vital: care, vision, and love. This transition was not about handing over the baton in the literal sense, but about recognizing that endurance is not always brute strength. Sometimes, endurance is learning to lean on those who care for you. For Andre, survival had once meant sheer willpower, the stubborn refusal to stop. Now, it meant trust. Trusting Pierre, trusting his team, trusting the bond of family to carry the dream forward. And so, what could have been the beginning of an ending instead became a new chapter. With Pierre at his side, Andre found a second wind. Together, they turned fragility into resilience, vulnerability into strategy, and music into something more than performance. It became a shared inheritance, a family gift to the world. For the audience, the waltz was still joy. For Andre, it had become rebirth. The pandemic of 2020 forced Andre Rieu into something he had never known before: silence. For decades, his life had been an endless rhythm of rehearsals, flights, and concerts. One night he could be playing in Sydney, and the next week in New York or Vienna. The stage was his second home, the audience his extended family. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. For the first time in over half a century, Andre stayed in Maastricht, grounded not by choice but by circumstance. At first, it felt like exile. The man who lived through applause was surrounded only by quiet walls and empty streets. He described those months as a strange mirror, where I finally saw myself without the orchestra, without the stage lights. Yet, silence became a teacher. With no schedule pressing him forward, Andre found himself reflecting on the arc of his life, the coldness of childhood, the rebellion of youth, the triumphs, the illnesses, and the unshakable love of his family. He began to understand that music had never been just performance. It was his way of surviving, of healing, of connecting. When the world reopened and he stepped back on stage, the atmosphere was unlike anything he had ever felt. Audiences weren't just eager for entertainment, they were desperate for hope, for shared joy, for human connection. People cried openly during the first notes of the waltz, couples held each other tighter, and entire arenas sang in unison. Andre later admitted, it was as if the whole world had been starved of joy, and suddenly, we could breathe again. But as he reached his mid-70s, a question lingered in every concert hall: how much longer can this continue? Whispers of a final world tour circulate constantly in the press. Fans dread the announcement, clinging to each concert as though it might be the last. Andre dismisses the speculation with humor, insisting that he will play as long as his body allows. Yet behind the charm lies a man acutely aware of his limits. Years of relentless touring, illness, and grief have left their mark. What cannot be denied, however, is his legacy. Andre Rieu did not simply revive the waltz, he redefined classical music for millions. Where others saw elitism, he saw universality. Where critics demanded solemnity, he offered laughter and dancing. He turned skeptics into believers and skeptics' insults into sold-out stadiums. In doing so, he became not just the king of the waltz, but an ambassador of joy. Today, his orchestra stands as a global family, his son Pierre as a protector of the dream, and his hometown Maastricht as a beacon for fans who pilgrimage from across the world. Economists measure his success in millions of euros and tourism numbers. Historians may one day measure it in how he democratized beauty. As one journalist famously wrote, "The King of the Waltz gave us more than music. He gave us permission to feel joy again." And maybe that is the unanswered question itself, not when he will stop, but whether the melody he created can ever truly end. For Andre Rieu, the final bow may come one day, but the waltz he gifted to the world will dance on forever. Andre Rieu's story is more than the tale of a musician. It is the story of a boy who grew up in a cold, disciplined home yet discovered warmth in the embrace of a violin. It is the story of rebellion against tradition, critics, and even fate itself. And above all, it is the story of joy. From his humble beginnings in Maastricht to becoming the king of the waltz, Andre transformed a fading tradition into a worldwide celebration. He proved that music does not belong only in gilded halls, reserved for the elite, it belongs in the hearts of everyone. Whether in Vienna, Sydney, or New York, his concerts turn strangers into family, reminding millions that it's okay to laugh, dance, and even cry together. But behind the glamour, we saw the fragility, illness, exhaustion, and the grief of losing close friends. We saw the cost of carrying joy to millions while suffering in silence. And yet, we also saw resilience, a rebirth through his son Pierre, who stepped forward to protect his father and ensure the dream could continue. Now, at 75, Andre Rieu stands as both an artist and a symbol. His legacy is not just in the notes he played but in the emotions he unlocked. Critics once mocked him, but history will remember him as the man who gave the world permission to feel joy again. And perhaps that is his greatest masterpiece, a melody that will never truly end. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring journeys. Drop a comment below. What does Andre Rieu's music mean to you? And most importantly, keep the waltz alive by sharing this video with someone who needs a little joy today.